Hello, it's your girl, AJ. Decided to add some kick to solo pod. All right, I think the Phillies are playing right now. I don't know if they're winning or losing. I don't really care tonight. I'm in a random mood, so I just decided to do a solo pod tonight. Welcome, AJ's Suburban Princess, as you see here. Welcome to BirdsOfAFeather, my thoughts. Random broadcast. I'm not even, as you can tell, no makeup, a little side hat. Like I just got off the beach. Wish I had my hat from Puerto Rico last October. And just thoughts randomly. I think this music is too loud. While I'm adjusting this music. Hope all of you are doing well. I know we're going through a period of itchiness right now because we don't really know where exactly our teams are as far as, do we look like we're positive about the Sixers going into these first round of playoffs after the way they played the Raptors towards the end of the regular season and before mid-season? No, but a fan I will always be, and I will always support my guys. Are we positive that Joel will be the MVP? No. Should he be? Without a doubt. Jokic has already had it. He doesn't really care about the award. Devin Booker should have been a third nominee. Giannis is kind of a given. But for Joel, in such a year of turmoil for this team, because the Australian decided to be an eggplant, he managed to persevere and find his inner strength. Knock on wood, not be as injured as he's been in the past. In fact, if he hadn't had COVID, he would have pretty much had a stellar year. I think his mindset had changed once he realized he was going to have to go through all that early season questioning when the Australian decided not to return. I really feel like it's important for us fans to realize what our place is in this playoff season. It seems like it's been a longer year than it has because a lot of the drama took most of the energy from this season. But they had a late start in getting their chemistry. And then, of course, when Harden finally graced the team, it was almost like 2 weeks of heaven. And then the reality of the fact that they weren't playing strong enough teams defense-wise, that's when the Harden train kind of went to a slow derail. But he is still the same player. He is definitely older, but I do think that the little tricks that he does have, they could come in handy after a nice week of time away from competition and just straight on practice drills and whatever else they do before the actual first game on Saturday. I'm trying not to be too negative Nancy about it, but I'm realistic. I mean, he definitely lit this team up in a way that they couldn't really get once most of the team had been decimated with COVID and or contact tracing, and if not injuries. He definitely was a step in the right direction offensively for this team, but clearly the defensive side is still a little questionable. Now, Tyrese Maxey definitely has won our hearts and minds, even since last year in his rookie year, with his nonstop drive and his nonstop positive outlook as far as being a team player, rolling with the punches, accepting the losses, cheering on the wins, finding different ways to move the offense along, even when he was still learning. He's been a definite success story on this team. Hands down, definitely most improved as far as the shooting. I mean, he's taking risks now that even Harden isn't doing anymore as far as the step back three, him finding his own way under the rim, whether he's flying or literally, hoisting it under somebody's arm or over his head and managing it to make it work. Joel's still being Joel, finding ways to get space, and he's learning to be a better dribbler, even though he's still got a long way to go there because I don't think it's a skill he ever really utilized. But I think he's starting to show a little bit of a handle. I think he's also learning that if he's stalling too long, Tobias has this problem too. It can cause turnovers. So when there isn't a definite plan, it's obvious when this team plays certain teams, certain opponents, because when they're trying to kill time and make space, uh, it's kind of when things start to go a little lopsided. You just hope that they don't stay too much in their head during this series because it can easily be a 4-0 or 5-0 defeat. Let's pray we don't have what they did in the bubble because that team was definitely not all in mentally. This team, I think they already know what they're losing already halfway through the series because of Matisse's vaccination status as far as games 3 and 4 in Canada. So we know that half of his presence will be there starting Saturday and the next game, and then after that they're on their own. So I kind of agree with the thought of not even starting Thibault so they can get used to not having him, but it also defeats the purpose because you want to be up at least a game or two before you go to Canada and don't have him. I think we all think that they will become more dependent when Thibault's not there, but at this point they've pretty much done when he's in there and not doing much, and then when he is in there and doing a lot, and when he's there but then is so full of fouls that he can't even really contribute for a whole game. So it really doesn't make a difference, but it does. Danny has been showing a lot of defense. Tobias even showed flashes of defense consistently with certain teams. So it's like it really just depends on who's comfortable in their defensive stance from that point on, because by the time you hit game 3, you pretty much figure out how your opponent works. And so if by the time they're in Canada and they still look like they don't really know how to create strategy so that they can get the ball and not turn it over, then that series is pretty much going to be one and done. You can always tell when players are overthinking, and you can always tell when it's hard to mask the fact that there's no creativity in the offensive scheme. And that really goes back to Doc, but he would never tell us fans that. He would make it sound like everything is just up to them and I'm just the coach. But I don't think that Doc being an old school Krabby Patty really makes a difference, because at the end of the day, every playoff game that this team has been in, whether it be a first round exit or not, the fact that they even got there with the up and down yo-yo way that they produce points and win or lose games, it really just comes down to team chemistry. Is all your head in the same place? Do you remember the spots that make you great? And then if stuff doesn't work, do you panic and just kind of improvise in weak ways? Like, they got to find better ways to improvise when their schemes are figured out. And sometimes we all know by the third quarter is usually when this team starts falling apart, because either they've got too much rest from the break, or usually the opponent is just figured them out. But they need to find ways to rebound when coming from halftime, especially if they're like up in double digits and then lose the lead and lose the game. No more of that in the playoffs. Every game should be close if it has to be, if not a win for the Sixers, for this series to not be as intense as we're all thinking, or some of us are thinking it's going to be. I think it's going to be hard only because, Toronto's a young squad now. There's no Kawhi on that team. There's no Van Fleet will be there, and Van Fleet is going to get his buckets no matter how short he is. It doesn't matter. He'll make his shots, but he'll become more of a threat when they're home, obviously, because Matisse won't be there. But playoffs, the refs tend to be a lot more tough, so it may not matter because Matisse may be called for a lot of fouls on purpose when they're in Canada. So you never know. It really probably will be on mostly Danny and Tyrese or who else? Tobias, to play and Embiid, because him using his length under the basket is really going to have to be a factor during this series for them to feel any kind of confidence that they can win in 6. Um, I mean, in a perfect world, I would want them to win out. I'd like them to make it a quick series and just be done, but they have shown that this team literally gives them fits, and it's simply because of strategy. There's just certain things that the matchups aren't that great. And it's not because the Toronto players are great. It's just they have figured out ways to create space that the Sixers did with other teams that were worse than them. And they can't seem to duplicate that same strategy with this team. So it's a big hurdle to overcome. I'm for one, I'm not going to sit here and expect a sweep. I'm hoping it won't be a sweep against the Sixers either. They've got to go eye for eye. And I just hope that the Sixers at the end of the day do win in 6, because I just also think that would be catchy because, the 6, Toronto, da, da, da. But I also just think it would make sense because I think both teams have just as much chance at winning or losing this series as any matchup in the playoffs. And when you have teams that are kind of similar but not really, it could just come down to whatever team has the worst day on the most critical game, and who shows up. Because it is all mental. Yes, maybe the Sixers aren't athletic, but I do think Toronto is just quick on the draw and they just have a different strategy. And I think Doc is literally just standing there watching them and expecting them to turn water into wine. And I expect there to be some Paul Reed, whether he wants to admit it or not. I do expect to see Korkmaz. I do expect to see Shake at some point because they're going to need those legs throughout the game when the pace gets out of control, and it will. Toronto plays fast. And I'm just thankful that they didn't have to actually play somebody like the Cavs or somebody, because I think they would have been embarrassed, and not saying the Cavs are great. It's just that for some reason, up until I think the last matchup, they have been getting out classed coaching wise with them too. So part of me, because I'm most of these people that are emotional about how Doc doesn't seem like he really wants to coach in this city, which there's no real indication. It's just he's not catering to the fans, and that's what we prefer. We just also prefer a coach that's not so snippy with the media all the time, and I definitely would love to see a coach take accountability. And there are no perfect coaches. No matter who we would want after this, no one has a real clue. And if they do, it's probably not necessarily realistic. So I don't see anybody else replacing Doc right now, but I also don't see a reason to keep him if they don't get through this first round, because they pretty much always ended up in the second round on some level. Even with Brett Brown, they did. So, and, if the Nets end up winning the East, look, to each his own. But I do not think Ben will be playing. And if he is playing, he's not going to be as effective as people think, because he doesn't need to be. That's why all the recent articles that are trying to push that he's going to be playing is really irrelevant. Because the main thing is, as long as KD and Kyrie are in that zone, the rest of the team doesn't matter. And whether or not that means less pressure on Ben to show up, it's not even a thing. It's just the fact that we know that he hasn't played since last summer. And there's no way that you're going to get ramped up that quickly in time for a game. If he does, he's going to be taking a lot of breaks because he's going to lose wind, because if you're not used to going back and forth on the court like that in over like a year, well, less than a year, then what do you expect during a playoff game? The pace gets faster just out of nerves and pressure and timing and everything. So we'll see how that develops, but I don't see it really ending really well with him there. But I don't really care either way. I'm just more like, if they're a factor against the Sixers at some point and the Sixers are still somehow in it, that's going to be definitely a game to watch. And I, for one, don't expect to see that. But look, stranger things have happened. Let's just get through these first couple games and just pray and hope that with or without Matisse, this team will be able to come back home with a victory, and at least 3 wins under their belt. So yeah, I try not to be pessimistic about it, but it is what it is, man. And The Eagles right now have been kind of laying on the low as far as free agency. I mean, at this point, we pretty much saw all the free agents that they have got. And, the rumors of all these rookies that are making visits in the Eagles don't really mean anything. But the draft could be really interesting or it could be very annoying at the same time. I do not expect them to be getting any quarterback in the first round. I don't expect a wide receiver even. I expect them to get nothing but defensive players for their picks. And then the ones that they, move back for or traded for, I'm hoping that's where they get the wide receiver and maybe a quarterback. But I don't really think it's a priority even for Howie to think about a backup quarterback at this point, especially when you don't know veteran wise who might shake loose and who might be someone to play behind Jalen. Um, I mean, I know I always bring this up on podcasts like it really matters, but I personally would love Colin Kaepernick to be the backup just because I think that not only will he be on an actual team, I think he'll be an inspiration to Jalen because him being a biracial black man and Jalen being a black guy under all this, scrutiny, that we're naturally going to give him as Philly fans who expect so much. I think it'll take the pressure off of Colin. But it probably will bring drama a little bit, but I don't think it would be drama if we brought if we had signed Deshaun Watson. I don't think he's going to even play. So I think all of this has been just the worst decision ever. But because the charges never were really filed, I mean, the charges were never really were dismissed until whatever the situation is, he's not having to deal with anything right now. Which he may be taking a breath for it, but I personally say that's shameful because no matter what, whoever's been traumatized from these exchanges with this man realize now that he's going to be still getting paid for doing what he wants to do, while these women, some of them will be holding a lot of resentment towards him, and that will have to be on his conscience. The Phillies have started off pretty weird, but strong in the beginning. I do think they're still, and I didn't think it was going to change really, but they're still going to have an issue with the outfield and they're still going to have an issue with pitching. I don't believe Nola should be a starting pitcher personally. I feel like he loses more. He'll have one great showing and then he just whimpers out for a while and then he has another great showing and then he whimpers out. I just feel like as many things that they still need to figure out for their roster, Nola needs to get traded. It's my hot take with the Phillies because I just don't feel like you already knew this year they can only do so much with the players that they have because there's going to be a lot of new faces that we don't know. Obviously Castellanos is working and Schwarber's working, even though I agree that he doesn't need to be starting off all the time. And I know Girardi is probably still figuring things out, and he'll probably shuffle up the roster again for a while until he feels like everything works. And Reese and Bryce will always start off shaky. I mean, Reese was doing fine, actually. Bryce is really the one who's slow to get himself a decent hit. But Bryce has always started off cold. So as many people who hate him just because of the deal, it's the same hate that people show towards Tobias Harris. It's like they're human. They're going to have their up and down days. And realistically, if you are a smart fan, you understand that nobody honestly is really worth the amount of money that they make. They ask for top dollar because they know they can get it, not because they necessarily are better than anyone in the world. That's just how the game works. And sometimes a lot of people forget that and forget that there's still a dude who is trying his darndest to be perfect all the time. And in doing so, can sometimes even make him play worse. And Bryce is always known to press. So we're going to go through ups and downs with Bryce, but sometimes he doesn't always have to hit a home run either. Sometimes a base hit is enough. And he has gotten on base a lot because he gets walked a lot. But again, I still don't see any difference from when we first got him. So that's not any reason to hate or love Bryce any less or more. And the Flyers, poor things, are just whimpering out of this season. They have tons of things to work on. They had some early injuries, obviously, and they had some major roster changes, but there's just been no feel for how this club is going to work out because you don't know you don't really know who is consistent, which seems to be a definite theme with all these Philly teams. But the Flyers are definitely in a rebuild mode. They're definitely hard to really watch because they can get your interest until they lose that shootout, or they get to tie in a game and then all of a sudden just lose in a power play. Or so in that sense, nothing's really changed with the Flyers. But the fans are still loyal, and you can only respect that. Lastly, um, it's springtime now, and I think it's time to embrace the fact that quarantine left a lot of impressions on all of us mentally. But what quarantine can't take from all of us is that it gave us a lot of time to think about things we have to do, changes we need to make internally. Because the virus is not going to die. It's just going to maybe be dormant for a little bit, but there's always going to be people who um, carry it. There's always going to be people like myself who choose to be vaccinated. And there's always going to be people in between who are taking it to such a degree that it has nothing to do with health. So just remember that everything in life is precious, everything has a season, but still manage to keep your head straight and just be positive. That's all I got tonight. Peace out. Bye.